Breaking news to tell you about this afternoon, a ruling rejecting the disgraced ex-president's latest attempt to delay and dismiss the many cases and allegations against him. An appeals court denied Trump's request for a stay in his ongoing civil fraud trial in New York, which wrapped its first week with a dramatic ending from the latest witness to take the stand. New York Attorney General Letitia James had opposed the bid to stay the trial, but was amenable to another ruling that handed Trump a small and temporary win. The appeals court issued a temporary pause in the dissolving of all of Trump's businesses as the trial continues next week with another round of key witnesses. Joining our coverage, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. She's been in that courthouse all week long. She was there today. Neil is still with us as well. Lisa, this has been, it's not surprising that it's so dramatic, but it has been a very dramatic week.
It has been a dramatic week, and not all of the drama was necessarily around the courtroom.
It was all legal, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Most of the drama was outside the courtroom. But if you are a legal observer, as I am, and a former lawyer, you understood that some of what appeared to be really dry testimony was actually itself very dramatic. And that's how I would characterize, Nicole, the last 2 days with Jeff McConney, who's the former Trump Organization controller. He's now retired, but he was the principal point of contact with the accountants for the preparation of the financial statements that are at issue in this case. He was also the person that largely assigned values to properties, of course, as directed by Alan Weisselberg, who we assume was also directed by former President Trump. And in that testimony, we got a bunch of really damning admissions about the most egregious examples of fraud. I think the best one was today when they were talking about the golf courses. The Statement of Financial Condition says explicitly no amount of brand value is baked into the price of those golf courses. And yet, each of those golf courses, as they were valued, was assigned a 15 to 30% premium for what? Brand value, according to the work papers. And McConney had to admit on the stand he did that. That was him. And did the Statement of Financial Condition say that they did not do that? Indeed, it did.
Your point about the drama in and out of the courtroom, I mean, Trump's antics outside the courtroom became central to the drama inside the courtroom when he smeared one of the judge's clerks and then has the limited gag order essentially on his conduct. How did that seem to sort of further enrage and frustrate Trump as the week went on?
I think Trump was so beyond enraged when he finally left because he had to see Donald Bender on the stand, a person who worked for the Trump Organization for decades, essentially dismantle what the chief lie is behind Trump's business empire. Between that and Judge Engoron's ruling, Trump was as angry as I think I've ever seen him on camera or off. And as you and I have discussed, what's really funny about that is the man is facing 4 criminal indictments.
He could go to jail, but not from this trial.
He is facing a 30-plus count indictment in Florida on revealing our nation's most valuable national security information. We now know that he has shared some of that national security information just across the table casually with visitors at Mar-a-Lago. That doesn't appear to scare him because he can campaign that away by becoming president again. This case, however, is the one of the 5, and I do consider it 5, 4 criminal indictments in this civil fraud case, that I think really scares him the most, because if he gets elected president again, there's nothing he can do about it. He can't wish Letitia James away. He can't pardon himself out of a civil liability judgment, and he can't basically direct his Department of Justice to make her stop. It's not a prosecution. There's no OLC opinion saying that you can't have a civil case against a sitting president. Bill Clinton learned that the hard way, and now we all know that too.
Neil, there is something that is so easy to understand, too, about what's going on, and that cuts against his commitment to making everything politics, right? I mean, he lied about the size of an apartment. Those are problems and facts that anyone who rents in New York City, as I do, can solve with a tape measure. There are other things about this case that are easy to understand. On the question of fraud, it's over, lights out, guilty of fraud. And I understand that isn't a criminal description of guilt, but he's been found liable for fraud. What do you make of where this trial stands at the end of week 1?
I think in a very, very bad place for Donald Trump. And I think the whole reason he attended his trial in person is because he wanted the narrative surrounding the trial to be about his presence there rather than the facts of the case. And now that he's left and the trial's underway, I think we're starting to see why he preferred that the media not report on the details of the case. I mean, his defense, Nicole, is one basic thing, which is, well, real estate valuations fluctuate all the time. But they don't fluctuate like this. I mean, you don't like say the apartment in which you live is 33,000 square feet when it's 10,000 square feet. And it's also interesting. The other big problem with his defense is always the valuations cut in his favor. If they
Right.
fluctuated up and down and so on, it'd be one thing. But the fact is they're always one directional in order to lower his tax bill or in order to maximize his assets when he's seeking financing. That, I think, is why, he's basically dead to rights in this case, as far as I can tell. I've seen no viable defense. And so I do agree with Lisa. This is a real clear and present danger to Donald Trump. I would say, however, that the Georgia state prosecution and the New York state prosecution are also ones in which, even if he were elected or some other Republican were elected president in 24, they couldn't get rid of those either.